Hey, everybody, it is Dr. Vibe saying you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. We got something new for Blab. I got my intro music flowing on the Blab, I think. Can you hear it, Charles?
No, I can't hear the intro.
Okay, I thought I did. Oh, it's a disappointment. All right, it's okay. No problem. Well, as always, I'd like to say again, you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. I'm not going to even get talking too much about me today. It's never about me. It's about all of you. But we have a special guest, Dr. Charles Corporell the third. He didn't put in it. It's not there, but he is the third. And I've been blessed to meet this young gentleman a little while back. He had written an article at the Good Men Project, a platform that I do a lot of stuff for, and he does stuff for. And I love his passion. I love his thought process, but most important, I love his heart. And the most important thing for me is, how's your heart? And that's what's key. And I love this man's heart. And he's coming on the show today to chat about a really important discussion about men's road from hypermasculinity to healthy masculinity. So give a little background about yourself, Charles, and then we'll get right into the discussion.
Sure, Doc. So as we talked before, I am a proud graduate of Green Run High School in Virginia Beach, Virginia, class of 1989. So I always give a shout out to my high school. Probably one of the most important and formative years of my life being there. I grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia, spent the first 35 years of my life there, went to James Madison University where I got a Bachelor of Arts degree in history. After college, I moved back home and obtained a master's degree in education and began my teaching career in Virginia Beach Public Schools. And so I spent 10 years there, probably one of the best experiences of my life, teaching young African-American males and kids of all colors and ages, American history and psychology. And it would be my experiences mentoring our young brothers that really pushed me to go back to school, Doc, and get my PhD from Tulane University, where I have a PhD in psychological science. And after that, I got into the professoriate and was a professor at Loyola University for 5 years, which I enjoyed. I continued my research on hypermasculinity, African-American males, in education, as well as hypermasculinity's impact on women and sexual assault. So earlier this year, I decided to become more of an applied psychologist. I decided to form my own consulting firm. It's called What's Your Revolution? That has kind of been my mantra, Doc, asking the world and asking people, what's your revolution? And how does your revolution impact the rest of the world? And so this consulting firm basically is an educational and nonprofit firm that goes around and works with specific entities, government agencies, school systems, nonprofits on trying to provide the best avenues for children and families, African-American men and boys, for them to have more resilient outcomes, to basically help these organizations provide programming, evaluation, training that will impact their lives. Wonderful. So that's where I am right now, Doc.
That is really good stuff. Let me ask, why this discussion at this time? Why the importance of hypermasculinity? And it's because I know you and I have known each other a little bit digitally. Right. I know it's always been a passion, but it seems that you've taken it to another level now.
Well, it's interesting because I think there's a lot of conversation about hypermasculinity and how it's portrayed in our society, and then putting into context how we think of Black masculinity. And too often Black masculinity is associated with hypermasculinity. And so I want to move the conversation from hypermasculinity to healthy masculinity. And the interesting piece, let's dive back a little bit, Doc, is that I've spent the last 10 years studying hypermasculinity. And it's funny, when you're in grad school, people always ask you, why are you studying that? Why do you study that? And the joke is that research is me search. So for me, it has been an internal search of my own masculinity and seeing bits and pieces. Let's not even say bits and pieces, large pieces of hypermasculinity within myself, and how I have been trying to move myself over this period of time, this introspection from a hypermasculine ideology to a more healthy masculine perspective in my own life, so that I can have more of an impact on myself as well as the people in the communities that I work with. So that's why. And I think that is a conversation that many men, but particularly, again, in context, many Black men don't have. And so as I think about my impact on the world and my impact from a literary standpoint, is that I want to look at how men get from the struggles of their masculinity to a healthy place.
So I just want to have the foundation laid. Do you want to focus specifically during our conversation on Black male masculinity? So I just want to make that clear.
I would prefer that, Doc, if possible.
No problem. So then let's take it from the foundation and build it up. Where are the origins of Black male masculinity? Where are their roots? Since you've had some time to look at this subject, where are some of the roots laid in the foundation for Black male masculinity?
I think if we bring it to American Black male masculinity, I think the roots of it stem back to slavery. And I think that Black men back in slavery were emasculated. And so trying to formulate a masculinity here in American society has always been very challenging for African American men. And so in that formulation, our masculinity has been subservient or attempted to be taken away from us because of the mentality of slavery. And so we saw how masculinity was portrayed, particularly in slavery, as the big African slave was then used with a stronger African American female slave to then make a stronger race. But then when African American men spoke out about the atrocity of slavery, they were then castrated or emasculated in such a form that how could we as men formulate a positive masculinity? Even now, as that, we have traversed historical context to look at how Black masculinity is seen as something as negative out in society. And we see particularly how the brothers that you and I have had a conversation about, that there's a fear of Black masculinity. And because of that, Black men have had to try to find a way to comport themselves that sometimes is challenging. I think that's the best thing that I want to say. And so I want to begin to have this conversation. I don't say begin. This is a conversation that is probably happening in many places around the country. But to have it here with you, as men think about how do we move away from this hypermasculine persona that we've had to portray because it is a mask, we've had to protect ourselves, into something that is more healthy, where we are out in the community and people are seeing a vast array of Black men and their masculinities.
This is not an easy subject to tackle because one of the challenges that's been going on for so many years. You've laid the foundation that actually, here's a comment from Regeneration LBC saying, perhaps we have to live and toggle back and forth between two worlds, the mask, as you say. What are your thoughts on that?
I truly believe in that. And that's one of the interesting pieces when we think about healthy masculinity. And some of the things that many of our brothers may have the inability to do is to toggle back and forth, is to understand that. And there may be some pushback because of this, because some might say that we need to sustain and we need to stay on one side of the fence. But to be successful in our current society, we must understand the depths of who we are, but how we interact with others. It was interesting. I was having a conversation with, I'll call her my mentor because she's kind of taken that role, strong Black female. And she was talking about the progression of my business. And she was giving me some ideas about the things that I should be really talking about. And she said that cross-racial masculinity was the topic, that maybe we needed to move past just black men and boys. That we needed to think about how we interact as men across these lines, because it is these cross-racial masculinities that are some of the reasons why we're seeing the atrocities happening to black men today, because men are not understanding how to get along and how to comport themselves as men with each other.
Absolutely. I fully agree on that. I get that. I think both paths are needed. So share a little bit more with us on your thoughts on this, because in a few minutes I'm going to open up the seat, and I have a feeling that Regeneration LBC would like to join. And I see, well, the gentleman, Michael Couteau. This is very interesting. He's joined the conversation. Michael, Michael is a longtime person. I know he's actually a member of the government of Ontario. So to have him jumping on this,
thank you for joining.
Michael, if you want to jump in, no problem. But share some more thoughts on this, Charles. And then after this, I'm going to open up the chair officially.
Okay. So what do you mean? What do you want me to share more thoughts on?
Okay, you've laid the foundation. How has this either progressed or regressed throughout Black African American history?
I think what we've seen, and this is just again the opinion of my opinion. I think that what we saw in periods of adversity, where we saw the civil rights movement, and we saw the strength of the Black Panthers, we saw the strength of men, Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. We saw these strong Black men come out and stand for specific ideals, specific philosophies, and lead people. But I think that after the civil rights movement, we saw, again, in my perspective, we've seen a vacuum. We've seen that the possibility that we haven't had someone stand up and show us what leadership looks like, what masculinity looks like. And then all of a sudden in 2008, we see this strong Black figure come and take over the White House. But it's interesting. I love watching President Obama and the way that he carries himself as a man, because to me, it is the picture of healthy masculinity. Because in the face of adversity, in the face of tremendous adversity, in the face of criticism daily, he still has to get up and lead a nation of people that look like him and that don't look like him. And to get up every day and say, you know what, I am the leader of all of us. To not get angry when he's criticized, to not be angry when things don't go his way. It's interesting that popular culture has now indoctrinated swag into its terminology. It is very interesting. I don't know if you've read Steve Stout's book, The Tanning of America.
No.
Very good book, but it details how African American culture is now becoming a part of mainstream culture, particularly mainstream media. But how we think about, I've heard people of other races talk about swag, and it's very, very interesting. But I love his swag. I love the way that he carries himself, and he shows me, because there are days that this angry Black man that I am, who has these components of hypermasculinity, I say, you know what would Barack do in this situation? He seems very comfortable in his skin, but he is also the president of the United States, and there have only been 44 people to be president.
Right.
So I think that what we've seen is that mainstream media, going back to your question, does not show these images of African American men. They show Barack, but then we see all of these negative images of men. I don't even watch the news anymore, Doc, because I don't see positive images of Black masculinity. And it bothers me. It's tremendous. And our young boys see that and they wonder, what are my models to adopt? Because all I see is athletes and rappers and convicts.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And well, that's one of the reasons why I started this format 9 years ago, because myself living here in Toronto, I didn't see what I thought was a realistic portrayal of Black men in the media. So I just said, you know what? If I'm going to change it, I got to start it myself.
Right.
I can't rely on anybody else. I got to do my own thing. So as we go on in our conversation, there is a seat open. If someone wants to come on in, you're more than welcome to join the conversation, because I know Charles would love people to share. I see there's some comments on the side here, but I know John, I knew John would be in fly. All right, here we go, John. Hey, John, how you doing?
How are you? How are you?
Blessed and highly favored. Thank you so much for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule.
Man, this is I'm thankful for you, Dr. Vibe, and so thankful for you, Dr. Corporal. I had to jump on even in the middle of or at the end of a workday now, hopefully, because this this topic is so essential and so necessary for every part of our welfare, mentally, physically, spiritually. And this is so hard, yet so necessary, because it's so hard to make that transition from that hypermasculinity, like you say, back to, or forward to, I should say, masculinity. As I was looking at the topic and then I started to hear you speak, Dr. Corporal, I wondered, is there a pictorial or some type of chart that represents the behaviors of hypermasculinity side by side in comparison to what masculinity looks like? Because in my profession in HR, and I'm a leadership coach and a business strategist as well, I work on behaviors and behavior modification, and what does that hyper look like, and then what is normal state or evolutionary state?
Charles, before you answer that, I hope you got some time, because that statement alone could take an hour. You know that.
Yeah.
and John, you better open up your top button. Relax yourself, because we're gonna be on for a while. I got the time, as long as you got the time. So Charles, go for it, man.
Man,
that's deep.
John, that is a deep question, and it is very interesting, because I get asked that question all the time. Because what hypermasculinity looks like on the street is different than what hypermasculinity may look like in your workplace.
Right.
And it's interesting. One of the last articles that I wrote as a professor was, we looked at a profile analysis of hypermasculinity with college students. And so it was interesting to have this extreme hypermasculinity, the traditional hypermasculine, the traditional masculine, and then the non-hypermasculine. And so let's just talk for a moment about what hypermasculinity is. And so what we found in this paper, and I must give a shout out to my colleagues Jamal Matthews and Avery Mitchell, is that there was these 4 constructs of hypermasculinity. So extreme anti-femininity, devaluation of emotion, dominance and aggression, and these callous sexual attitudes towards women. And so what that profile might look like, John, in the workplace maybe is going to be totally different than that profile on the street.
Right.
And so you may have someone in the workplace who may have these high and callous sexual attitudes towards women, high in devaluation of emotion, but not have that extreme anti-feminism.
Right.
And so those outcomes may look different than a person on the street that may be high in all of those outcomes. You may see sexual assault, hostile attitudes towards women, anti-gay attitudes, hostility towards other men, extreme competition in that larger extreme group. Yeah. But the interesting that we also found that there's a portion of the male population that doesn't adopt those hypermasculine attitudes. So let's move to the other side of your question, and that is really a question that I've been thinking about myself: healthy masculinity, and looking at positive self-esteem, well-being. One of the issues, let's not call it the issues, one of the conversations that I'm having with, and I'm 44 years old, is with other African-American men, is about the issues that we're facing mentally and physically as we age. Oftentimes those conversations are not had, John, because we adopt that construct of devaluation of emotion, and so we don't talk about our mental health needs or our physical needs. and we look at the health disparities for men. We don't talk about the mental health disparities for men because men don't talk about mental health, but we do see the health disparities, diabetes, heart rate, high blood pressure, all of these things, lower life expectancy. And then if you add the variables of socioeconomic status, those even what the life expectancy.
Compound.
Yeah, exactly. They compound. And so, but you see this adoption of hypermasculinity. I don't need to go to the doctor. I don't need to have this conversation with my board because you know what? My blood pressure medicine, all right, is affecting my ability to have an erection, which is taken away from my manhood. So I don't comply, you know, with what. And so we see these things compounded. So my feeling is that we have to open up the conversation with men, with Black men, about what does healthy masculinity entail so we can live longer lives. Many of our young brothers are seeing men die, going to jail because they're killing each other because they can't handle or resolve minimal issues between themselves. I will adopt this dominant aggression persona because I don't want you to disrespect me. And my mantra is, I don't want to be the sheep amongst the wolves.
Right. That's you said a whole mouthful, and I'm
sorry. I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. This head is big for a reason. I can process it all, but it's just I'm proud of you just for tackling it, because this is a problem that takes generations to perhaps cure, if there's a cure. And I think there's multiple entry points to how we resolve this, the psychological aspect and the healthiness behind that. I think you got parenting that is a major key to get to the root of the problem. And I think you just got everyday living. And you were right. It's so profound that you said what hypermasculinity looks like on the street is different than what it looks like in my office building. I can still see traces, but you might not get all of the parts here in this office building. Yeah. That was amazing.
And, you know, we don't have to just put this in the context of Black men. The CEO may be hypermasculine. The white male CEO, you know, may comport himself in a hyper, but, you know, it may be for him, you know, that devaluation, that extortion, or those anti-feminine attitudes. You know, a good friend of mine is a woman who works in a very male-dominated, you know, medical field.
Right.
And she sees white men comport themselves that have these strong anti-feminine attitudes, that women, you know, are here to be seen and to be subservient. Yep. And she's a very, very powerful woman, very knowledgeable, but she is seen as someone who should be just seen because these men feel threatened. Exactly. They feel threatened by.
Right.
And so it was interesting, and I'll be quiet after this. When I was giving my interview at Loyola to get my job several years ago, one of the questions was, what do men do when they feel like their masculinity has been taken away?
Wow. I want to hear the answer to this one.
Well, the interesting thing is that we will increase our levels of masculinity. And too often, who do we increase that masculinity with? Women. And that becomes problematic. And so it was a very interesting thing that I had to think about over time, that emasculation leads to an increasing of masculinity, which has harmful effects.
No doubt. And cyclical effects, I would imagine. Exactly.
And we do that with each other. We do that because we have been thrown this ideology of masculinity that it is about power and power over others.
Right.
And so we have this dalliance with each other about power. And so we do things or have interactions with other men to try to subvert power or to gain power.
Wow.
And so those daily interactions. And so we forget sometimes that if I were to allow myself, and men hate this, to be vulnerable, to have those conversations, to leave power out of the conversation, out of the dynamic.
Stop swearing.
You know, where would we be?
Right. I said this in another one of Dr. Vibe's blabs. I said that we as children are we are taught to be physically vulnerable, but not mentally.
Yes.
And spiritually and emotionally vulnerable. And that it's just a problem. We're not, I said it early on the sidelines, we're just not one person. And I think being able to toggle back and forth in between worlds and be a few different people, I think it has its advantages. But when you cannot find a oneness or a true identity, then we're lost. And that cycle happens over and over again. I think it's bad.
Let me just ask Charles, and I know you wanted to focus on Black male masculinity, but you jumped into saying that the white male masculinity. How does this subject from your space, and I know you're not an expert on white masculinity, but from what you see, what are the similarities and what are the differences?
That's an interesting thing. So, Doc, I am a gender researcher, so I look at masculinity as a whole. I don't really like to talk about differences.
Okay.
I think that they are contextual. When I said I want to talk about this, I don't want to talk about racial differences. I think there are contexts, and that context is that the form of the context may come in socioeconomic status, education, and how the perception of power comes into play. Mm-hmm. And so if we think about this dynamic, the perception of power by white men and the perception of power by Black men comes down to, at least in my opinion, is the perception of privilege.
There you go.
You know, and so that privileged masculinity is something that says that I can walk into a room and I am powerful just because of my race.
Yeah.
The other is trying to gain that power. And so what does that look like in an attempt to gain power and privilege? And so we think about this from the term is hegemony, or hegemonic masculinity. Mm. And so hegemonic masculinity is the power structure. You are in a position of power, and those who do not have hegemonic power are the ones that are attempting to gain that power. And so it looks a little bit different based on the context, Doc. I hope that answers.
Absolutely. You know, I think you've handled it really well, because I know you didn't want to go on it too much, but I think you've handled it really well in your answer. So if you look in the African American community, hypermasculinity has been going on for years. Why hasn't there been why aren't there more people like you? Maybe that's the best way of putting it. Why aren't there more people like the people on here, the people on the side chat room? What do you think is the blockers?
Well, let me say this, Doc. Not all African American men are hypermasculine.
Understood, but for those that are, you know,
those that are,
but not only that they are, but also talking about this.
Right. Well, talking about this, I think that's the big, because there are more men who are like us right now on this TV screen than we think. There are good fathers and husbands and partners, community members who are out, mentoring the generations that are coming behind us. But I think that, again, in my valued opinion, is that we are not seen. We are not seen, and we are very rarely targeted to tell our story. And let's just dive into that for a second, Doc.
Sure.
Is that our stories are not the ones that are exciting.
Not sexy.
It's not sexy, John. It's not sexy. I grew up in a 2-parent household. My father was an educator, a principal for 36 years. My mother was a reading specialist for 33 years. I went to good schools. They put me in spaces where they knew that I could be trained when racism hit, how to comport myself. They allowed me to have diverse friendships as I was growing up. So I was able to. My best friend was one of my best friends was named James. He was white. My other best friend was named Robbie. He was black. I had a Jewish family that lived across the street. All right, I still go.
Okay,
he froze.
He froze. No problem. If you can refresh, Charles, refresh. Let's see. Oh, okay. You're still with us via audio.
Story or something that provides a million followers. You know.
Oh, we lost him. But still.
Hello.
You're still there, Charles. Why don't you refresh your screen?
All righty.
Let's see if we get you back in by refreshing your screen.
Wow.
Sorry you're not getting this on other shows on Blab, John. This is the way I've been rolling for years. So sorry
I appreciate you, man. This is awesome.
More to come. Okay, we're back. Go ahead, Charles. Continue.
What was the last thing you heard? I was on a tangent, Doc.
Just, you know what? Just wherever you feel like continuing, it'll be valued.
Well, I just talked about how.
Oh, your best friends. Your friends.
Yeah.
And so, best friend named James is white. Other best friend named Robbie was black. I had a Jewish family who lived across the street. You know, and so I grew up in a very diverse culture. And I'm a former professor. I own my own business. But our stories aren't sexy. What I see on the nightly news is the brother who shot another brother, or the brother who did the armed robbery. You know, and the mentoring program who has a tremendous impact on the community gets 30 seconds. Our stories are not heard. And as well, John and Doc, we don't tell each other our stories.
That's why I have this platform.
Yeah, we don't tell each other our stories.
You know what?
So I haven't. Go ahead, John, please.
You just got something through to my deep brain, and the fact that when you said that's all we see on the news, that we know that, but it's almost like there's marketing and branding for hypermasculinity. Like the message is constantly planted in us.
Exactly. You think about the Dr. Pepper 10 commercials, the cigarette commercials of the Marlboro Man back in the day.
Yes, sir.
You know, and how we see masculinity, these traditional masculinity, even hypermasculinity. Look at ads. Look at ads that show men, you know, and women from a subservient perspective. Men standing over women, groups of men standing over one woman.
Right.
We think that's what we see. You know, we see the Dos Equis guy and his masculine, and we love that.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, we love to see that. Yeah. Because it sells. That's what sells. You think about the Old Spice commercials now, and the competition between the brothers. Terry Crews. Yeah, exactly. That's what sells. You know, if we're up there, the three of us are up there, we're not selling Old Spice.
No.
You
know, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But an interesting thing about Terry Crews, and I love him, and there's another brother I'll talk about, is that he supports this notion of healthy Black masculinity.
Yeah.
He talks about being vulnerable. He talks about what it means to be a father and a husband. He talks about how you should be interacting in the community and supporting yourself with self-care. What's the brothers, the receiver? I have tremendous respect for Brandon Marshall, receiver for the Jets. What I've seen, and I don't know that I've never talked to the brother, but what I've seen from him is that when there are critical conversations about masculinity, he comes out and says the things that people don't say. Yeah. When Michael Sam's came out last year, become the first open, Brandon Marshall made a point to say, you know what, our league is going to move forward. Why do we need to have this conversation anyway? When other players around the league were disowning Michael Sam's, that we don't need this, that was revolutionary to me what Brandon Marshall did. He came out and said, look, we're going to accept this, brother. It is what it is.
Right.
That's revolutionary. We need more people talking like that. People of significance who have a platform like Terry Crews and like Brandon Marshall to say these things about what healthy masculinity is and what healthy Black masculinity is.
And we need to couple that with the celebrities that have a voice. We need conversations with everyday people all the time. And those are the teachable moments, I believe, that we should be responsible for taking on.
Right.
And
exactly.
You made me think about my relationship with my 8-year-old son, and the fact that he won't grow up in a time or see the things that I have seen, and his exposure will be so much more expansive. And, even though he's 8 years old, I still kiss on him. I still hug him, and he can still come up and give me a hug. And he is seeing me cry, and I say it's okay to cry. And this is also how you address when you're angry and you're sad situations. Like, it's constant teaching and constant balancing of who he is to be. And I, to your point, I don't know how many of us are equipped for those teachable moments.
Well, there you go, right there. You're making a point about equipping. It's such a key thing. Equipping. How equipping teaching moments. How are you equipped to filter the noise that you deal with every day?
We're not.
Filtering is so important. Where it's always interesting to see when someone does something, what did they base their decisions on? What education did they just react on pure emotion without even filtering it through and looking at the repercussions to all those that are involved?
Yeah.
Doc, can I say something real quick?
No, take your time, man. No problem.
One of the things that, excuse me, is the sun is setting here.
No problem.
Turn on some light.
It does have to set, It rises in the east and sets in the west. You're good looking good. Go ahead.
But John, you said something, how we're equipped as a psychologist. And so I must make a play on, is that we need to think about the impact of therapy and on our long-term health. I'm fortunate through the Kellogg Foundation. I have a fellowship with them, a 3-year fellowship. And part of that fellowship is imperative that we go and get self-care as a leader and they promote. And so I have spent the last year in therapy myself.
I love it.
Yeah. Talking about my anger, what my triggers are, how do I handle myself when those triggers occur, being vulnerable. And like you said, your son is going to look up and say, how did daddy act?
No doubt.
Yes. Yep.
No doubt.
And they're going to say, okay, well, if daddy act like that, that means that it's okay if I act like that.
Validation. That's the validation.
That's the validation. And so I know potentially down the road, hopefully I will be a father. And I want my son or daughter to see that, hey, my father had adversity, but this is how he handled himself through that. And I needed the therapy. And that, again, going back to what you said, research is research, Doc. So I have to understand who I am as a man, and how do I then make the roads to being a more healthy man. And so therapy has been one of the biggest helps for me over the past year.
This is, I think you just outlined very eloquently how I do it in coaching, but how important it is for us to take a look in the mirror and to address our issues at the root and to heal and then to get better and better. Like that, it's so imperative, because who you are influencing, either intentionally or unintentionally, consciously or subconsciously, has to be recognized.
I agree. I just think, what some men, I'm not saying all men, but they need to invest in themselves. And I don't necessarily mean financially.
That, and yes, is the...
And as I say a lot, they need to have some intimacy with themselves. And I don't mean sexual. I mean intimacy. They need to do that. John, I'm going to give you a very interesting paradigm here, and I want to see how you react. Okay. I can tell with your nice shiny, you shave, right?
Yeah.
So have you ever had a moment when you're shaving and your son comes into the bathroom?
Absolutely.
Isn't it interesting that he's looking at the person he's going to be and you're looking at what you were?
all the time. And I recognize that he looks like me as a little boy, almost identical. And he's seeing the habits that he should form, the behaviors that he should take, how I treat my wife, his mother. But I mean, I'm saying that those two on purpose because they're two different roles. And he has recognized that. He's seeing me getting up for work every day or exercising at 5:30 in the morning while he's coming down and playing video games. You know, I am his example, and I need to take that, because if I'm his example, I'm also his friend's example, because he'll duplicate my behavior and show that example to his friends. So I have to get it right. I got to get it right. I got to work on me.
That's why it's so important what Dr. Charles is talking about,
Yes,
because
it is.
It's almost like a nuclear cloud. Once it hits, it spreads.
It spreads.
It spreads. Yeah. It spreads to places you don't even know. Like you just said, their friends, etc. One of my, I consider him a mentor, a gentleman who's on with me every Tuesday night, Glenn Barker. I remember one of the first times I had him on my show, he says, "We replicate what we emulate." And it's so true, especially in this hypermasculinity. It starts at a young age.
Right.
Yeah.
It starts at a really young age. So that's why I wanted to share with you, and glad that I'm so pleased that you realize that whatever masculinity, non-masculinity you're doing with your son, and for men out there that have daughters, it's the same thing. Yeah. They're getting those messages too. We're not just talking about the effects of hypermasculinity at a young age with young boys. It's also with young women.
That's true.
That is true.
It's not just a boy thing. It's a girl thing too, because many women get their impression of what a man is from their dad or the male in their life. And sometimes the unfortunate thing, we don't break it.
We would always say is that a father and a mother are a son and daughter's first girlfriend or boyfriend.
Wow. Mm-hmm. I never heard that. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, and so
that's real.
That's true.
Just a couple notes to what John, you were saying. My father is 86 years old, and so my mother would loves to say that I am just like my father in every way. Right. I have a lot of my mother's compassion, but I am Charles Corprew at its core.
Right.
And much of my own perceived hypermasculinity has come from watching my father being this strong man who had to deal with racism and adversity coming up, being the first African-American president of the Virginia Education Association, traveling all across the country, doing a massive resistance and, during the civil rights era.
Wow.
Seeing this very strong figure, turning that around to see this 86-year-old man who now I come home and I still kiss him on his forehead. I hug him, and look at this man who has given me life, has given me everything, and I love to see that relationship that we had, because people always ask me, I dress in suits. I'm always, I perceive myself as well dressed. So I'm always, they're like, why are you always dressed like this? Because my father was. Every day when I go out, if I'm speaking, if I'm doing something, sometimes I just put on a suit because I like to be in a suit.
Right. Same here.
Because that's how my father taught me to be. So the good and bad of that is that I learned how to be a man from my father.
Yeah.
So we have to think about how our young men are seeing this. Are we out there in the community pushing for images like us to be seen? Are we pushing on social media? Are we doing things that show healthy masculinity, healthy Black masculinity, and kind of moving that wave of hypermasculinity to the side to say, hey, we're here. We're the ones out in the community. Yeah. We're the ones holding this up. We also need help. And so that's where I'm trying to go.
No, that's where you're going. Not where you're trying to. That's where you're going.
Exactly where you're going.
That's where
I would just wonder how. I'm such a fan of small business and entrepreneurship and everything. I'm just wondering how I could help further that movement. because I believe in it. My whole thing is I'm built to help manufacture leaders. That's why I coach leaders. Like I'm the leader of leaders. And so I see the applications of your work in the work that I do, both corporately and in my side hustle. So I'm just wondering how I can further the movement and make your movement a movement, and how I can make the brand stronger.
Right. I think, as I say, that's a series of conversations that you and I can have to see how we can collaborate, on this. This is my passion right now. This is a part of my literary work where I'm having conversations with men across the country about their road. So what have you struggled with as a man? What are your struggles as a man every day? What do you need? And for those men who feel like they've gotten to a point where I have a healthy masculinity, what does healthy masculinity look like for you?
Yeah.
How do you define that?
Yeah.
And then how did you get there? So I think it's a series of conversations that I want to have with men across the country. But the key is that how do we get men to have these conversations, to be vulnerable? Older men will have these conversations because they've got nothing to lose.
Right.
But it is men our age, me, and younger that are really needing to have these conversations. You think about us as 40-year-old men and the things that we are dealing with.
Right.
Family or lack thereof of family, job, you're mid-career, as you're thinking about maybe a transition, some men may be going through divorce or troubled times in their relationships.
Yeah.
That's one of the pieces. And Doc and I have scheduled a series of shows, and we would love if you would come back on with us to talk about healthy relationships, well-being, positive leadership, all of these things. But I think we have to get men to talk about the struggles that they have as men, to be open and honest about that, and then to say, this is how I want to get there, and then to have these examples. We need to have men to say, hey, I've struggled with these things, but this is how I found out how to navigate them, and I'm happy. Because one of the things about happiness in men is that our depression looks like anger and violence and misogyny.
Ooh.
It's true.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
I would say, Charles, the way that this can happen is one conversation at a time, because one thing I've learned, especially with men, if one man sees a guy getting ahead, they want to know, how is that guy getting ahead?
Yeah.
It's like that age-old thing, if someone becomes an alcoholic, they didn't just become an alcoholic. They saw someone else who was drinking and they adapt. And that's why I do what I do. I just do one conversation at a time, and one of the things that men have to get off their chest is that we were raised, especially probably by our pops, if we had fathers or mothers, never talk to strangers. But the funny thing is, before each one of us met, what were we? We were strangers.
Right. And that's a part of that, is that building this network of men who are not strangers, Doc, who can have these can have these conversations. Building this network of men who are not strangers.
Well, I'm committed to that. I've been committed.
I am too, Doc.
I've been committed to. I wouldn't have you on my show if you weren't. I didn't feel you're committed to that. That's the thing. Making men from strangers to brothers.
Right. Exactly. I think that we lose sight of that sometimes. I'll give you an example. A good friend of mine, we were having lunch, and we kind of got into a terse conversation. Let's just put it that way. It was a terse conversation. Now, we're good friends. We are really good friends, but we had a terse conversation. But it took another brother who was also one of our good friends to say, hey, this is not how we behave. You all are friends. You all, what I'm saying? This, and he was adamant. He's like, look, this is not how we behave.
Right. And we need to be able to accept that from one another.
Exactly. And we had to look at each other and say, you're right. This is not, why are we even behaving like this?
Well,
But you know what, though? The important thing is that you have to be able to accept that those things happen and educate and teach how to move through them. You can't poo-poo those moments, because the confrontation for the sake of good is good. And we just need to teach each other how to handle those situations, not subdue them, not strike them from us, but move through them.
Boom. Exactly. And oftentimes it is understanding what that trigger was. Why did that conversation trigger that terse conversation?
Yeah.
We don't allow ourselves to go deeper, or at least to say what that deeper dive is, why that triggered me.
Oh my
gosh. And that's the thing. We have triggers, but those triggers are at the depths of who we are.
Say so.
And then we have to recognize, why am I upset with this? Because he didn't say anything that warrants this type of conversation.
Right.
But it triggers something down. And then my response was something that triggered him.
Your response was to the trigger.
Exactly. And so we have to understand, that goes back, John, to having the opportunity and the motivation to go and talk to someone to figure out what the depths of your triggers are.
No doubt.
Too many men that look like us are dying because they have not taken the time to deal with their triggers.
Amen.
Well, you know what? And you know what's, I'm going to add on that. One of the things that one of my mentors said, and I always say a lot of times, there's too many men that are screaming and nothing's coming out. And especially in this area of masculinity, we've got to take that energy we're using in hypermasculinity and turn it around. You turn it, for lack of a better word, for masculinity. It would be very interesting. Maybe we need to do a show. What men ... What is your definition of masculinity?
Absolutely.
My good friend Wisdom Powell, a professor at Chapel Hill, has had these discussions, and she is a giant in the field when it comes to looking at how men define masculinity. Much of her work has been done, and none of us is going to the barbershop anymore. But
I know so.
Yeah,
I have my home chair. My own chair.
Yeah.
But many of those conversations are at the Black Country Club, and and that's the interesting piece. I miss going to the barbershop.
You and me both.
Yeah, those conversations were rich conversations about whatever was going on, and you had a cadre of brothers who were diverse in socioeconomic status and life experience, who came together around and had conversation.
That's real.
We need to continue those conversations outside of the barbershop.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I fully agree. Look at this. Austin Go says we need to practice mindful breathing. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that take. That's very good. That's strong. Good comment. Good comment. Charles, anything else you want to add to our conversation?
Doc, I just appreciate the opportunity. I know that we've scheduled a series, and I think that we've touched on some of the broader topic areas that you and I have discussed. Mental health, well-being, leadership, mentorship, fatherhood, all of those things that I think are characteristics of healthy masculinity going forward. So I think we've reached the goal of what we wanted this conversation, and John has brought an added richness to this conversation. So I think that we've started a conversation, and hopefully the people who are listening can then reach out to their followers and say, hey, there's a good conversation going on, and we can be a part of it.
Well, I agree, and I thank all the people that have stayed on for the conversation. Kevin Scullion from Scotland has been on for most of it, and he's been enjoying it. And we need to expand our mind, not our muscle, and we need balance. But there's a good question. There's a good statement right there. Now, define balance when it comes to masculinity. There's that may be a whole show in itself.
That may be a whole
show in itself.
You know, I think the balance, and I'm going to have to think about this a little bit more. It comes to understanding that to me, really, it comes. The balance is looking at what you perceive as masculinity and how it is then exhibited in various contexts. So I think that to me right now, and I'm going to have to think about this more fully, Doc.
No problem. I like giving professors homework. I've had enough homework from professors, so it's time to pay back.
I got you. But I think it's understanding how to comport yourself in the various contexts in which you reside in, at least for right now.
Well, it's interesting. Austin Goes says the key to balance is to learn to be compassionate. I think probably said compassionate. Mm-hmm. So I think that certainly
that and more.
And right. I think we're going to start something called the Men's Masculinity series there, Dr. Charles.
All right. I look forward to it.
I think you gotta put that on CD or something. And
we'll talk.
Get it out.
Yeah, Charles and I will talk about that. There's certainly room because what he's sharing, what people like Glenn Barker, Marvin Thompson are sharing, and it needs to get out there because once it gets out there, it's going to just go like wildfire. You know,
we need it too.
We all need it, men and women, not just men. Yeah. Men, women, and our younger people, they need to hear it, especially the younger ones, if they can hear it now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Before it gets so embedded that it makes, not to say it can't be turned back, but it's a harder turn back than that. I see John wants to go home because he's got his bag ready.
No, I got a business dinner, but I also wanted to say that Dr. Corporal, I think we probably need to catch up on another venue because I was born in Norfolk, Virginia. All my family's down in Norfolk. Right, Virginia Beach, and I think I'm pretty sure I'm related to some corporals.
We may be cousins because we can talk offline. Yeah, exactly. Now you said Haynes. Yeah, we probably are.
Virginia Beach. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So the Dr. Vibe show not only brings men who don't know each other together, but probably relatives together that didn't even know.
That's what's up. But aside from family business, I appreciate the knowledge you dropped. I learned so much tonight from both of you, and just appreciate the opportunity to jump on with you.
We appreciate you, brother.
No problem, James.
Please inbox me with your contact information, and we'll get together.
All right, John, I'll let you go. Take care, brother. Okay, so Charles, before we sign off, and stay on after we sign off, any final comments, and also how can people get in contact with you?
I think we have to continue this dialogue, Doc. I think this platform, this opportunity to really talk about men's road from hypermasculinity to healthy masculinity. I think that when we think of healthy masculinity, we usually put it in the context of violence and violence towards women. But I think that there's more of a conversation, and people are having this conversation, like the Healthy Masculinity Project. But I think that not enough people are hearing that, Doc, and that all of these items that we'll talk about over the next couple of weeks, I think are important for men to hear. You know, how do we get there? And I think people want in this society, they want to know, they want practical advice. They don't want to hear instead of sitting and pontificating about what healthy masculinity is. They want to know, I feel this way. How do I get to this point? I want to be happy. I want to be happy with myself as a man. I don't want to have this comparison group where I go to the gym every day and say, I'm not man enough. I'm not like these guys. You got to be who you are. But how do I get there? So I think that we have to begin to think about these practical steps for men to own who they are. And this is how we get there.
All right. If people want to touch base with you, how are the best ways to do that?
So you can tweet me at Dr. Corporal, that's C-O-R-P.
You can type it. You can actually type it in the chat on the side.
Okay. So at Dr. Corporal or
go into the send a message at the bottom of the chat and just type it in. And then press enter.
There we go. It's all there.
There you go.
All right.
Fantastic. Well, this was another wonderful experience because this is another person I've brought from the family onto Blab, and they're not turning back for some reason, which is a good thing. So hey, we're going to be having many more of this. I just thought, I'm just thinking as we're going on through the show today, maybe we'll call this the men's masculinity series, and then we'll look at a different aspect of masculinity each time we come on board.
Right.
And I think that'll work out well. I am Dr. Vibe. I'm host and producer of the Dr. Vibe Show. You can catch me at the drvibeshow.com, thedrvibeshow.com. And this is the first blab I did that was simulcast at the same time on my website. So there you go. Another first with the doc. And you'll be able to see the replay, I'd say, on my website in a little bit. And also you can watch it on Blab. As always, and this always happens on Blab, people start jumping in as we're shutting down. So no problem. Catch the replay. Catch the replay. Thank you, John, the businessman. Thank you for stopping by. You missed some good stuff, but that's what replays are for. If you want to touch base with me, you can catch me at on Twitter at drvibeshow. Also, I'm now a certified men's empowerment coach. So if you want to touch base with me and get some empowerment in your life so you can make better decisions and reach your goals, you can certainly touch base with me there also. And also thegoodmenproject.com. I host the goodmenprojectshow.com, and also Dr. Charles does some contributions there also. So as always, I like to say you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles. You're a solution for someone's problem. Thank you to everyone who stopped by tonight. Of course, John, we have Austin Go. Thank you so much. Hopefully you'll come back for some more of the conversations at PPP Insiders, at Amy Olson, at Royal Ferris. I'd like to shout out people who come on the show. Of course, at Couteau, Michael Couteau, member of government in Ontario, the province that I live in. So we're just going to let it go there, and we'll say, catch you soon.